and so let me just begin with some introductions. In fact, Senator Assemblywoman, I'll bring you right up. There's a couple of chairs up here with handheld mics. No rest for the weary, man, you know? Yeah.
That's right. No, fine. Great. Yeah.
We'll do some introductions, and then we'll go ahead and let them get started. And again, you can text those questions to 585-734-2199. Thanks for participating in our telethon today. All right. First, Senator George Borrello. Senator George Borrello is really just been an unwavering advocate for, I will say, conservative principles. Specifically, he talks about rural New Yorkers and a champion of ag in the state. But he was my senator, one of the senators in my county. We lost him through redistricting, say boo, all right? But it meant a lot of other good things too in redistricting, so I guess I can't be too sorry for that. And we got another good senator, but I really miss having him representing that portion of Livingston County. We appreciate him a lot. He brings a different perspective to his role that we don't often get, and that is the perspective of a small business owner. And someone who actually signs paychecks and actually has to balance the checkbook. And so that's an interesting perspective that I think we should have a whole lot more of in the Senate. But for other reasons, I'm concerned we're going to lose it as we talk more and more about new pay scales and limitations and things. Another conversation for another day. Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh was selected to the New York State Assembly on November 8th of 2016. She serves 112th Assembly District. For those of you more in this neck of the woods, a little familiar with this area of Saratoga and Schenectady counties. But I have to tell you, just watching her think through and work through the issues, handle various floor debates, just to be involved in representing our values and things we care about, you are well represented in that assembly as well. So this session is entitled just Surveying the 2023 session. And we're going to turn it over to them to actually present their perspective from their chamber and hopefully just bounce things back and forth between them for about a half an hour. And then if you can text us questions, I'll read some questions and we'll give some of those questions and see what our representatives have to say about that. So, Senator, Assemblywoman, the floor is yours.
Yeah? Okay. He's letting ladies go first, I guess. Yes. Good morning, everybody. How are you? I hope you all had as much fun parking in the parking lot as I did this morning. It was fantastic. So I think the topic is a very good one, and I love working with the senator, and hopefully you'll find this interesting. So I'm starting my 7th year, as Jason said, and my role is I'm the assistant floor leader for my conference. So that means that as bills come to the floor, I'm one of 2 people that starts off and leads the debate. So one of the things that we're going to be seeing now this year, this session, that is a change. One of the things that I loved coming back to session in January was that we were all back in the chamber. You know, for a couple of years now during COVID, they'd been Zooming in. I had been in the chamber because I've got to be there to run the floor and to fulfill my floor duties, but the chamber was basically empty. Members were back in their offices, or even at the beginning of the pandemic, they were back in their homes, in their apartments, and you could see them on the Zoom. You could see them hanging out in their houses, trying to participate in sessions. So it was wonderful to have everybody back in the chamber again, because there's something about that. I don't know, there's something about that when we're all together, even though we know we're from all different parts of the state, we have very different points of view on many different issues. We could be together, and there's a better exchange of ideas, I think, when we're all together. My understanding is that today there's going to be a rules change that's going to be pushed through the assembly, which will allow again for empty seat voting. So we had the Assembly and Senate Democrats push through a pay raise. So that's on the backs of the taxpayers. And now, not only are the members making a lot more money, but now they don't even have to be in their seats to vote. And that is going to be, debated today, but they obviously have the votes to do it. What it means is that it will apply to both Republicans and Democrats on the floor, so that people can be back in their offices and they can be taking other meetings. And all I can think of is, it's kind of like when I'm trying to talk to my kids and they're looking down at their phones and they're like, yeah, I'm here. Or sometimes my husband, I'm listening to you. I don't know, multitasking as we're passing sometimes 50, 100 bills, important bills that are coming for consideration, and not even having to be in the chamber unless you want to vote against the yes vote. Then you have to go in and you're going to have to press your button and vote no. I'm very worried about our new members. We welcomed a number of new members on the Republican side in our conference, and part of my role, and one I really love, is to try to orient and prepare our new members for, they were smart enough and wise enough to be able to get the voters to vote them in, but my job is to help make sure that they understand how the process works so that they can stay in. And I'm afraid that a lot of them could be in a position of taking some bad votes if they're not in the chambers. So that's one thing that I see this session that's not a good thing, and it's going to be happening today, I believe, so you can keep an eye on that. And I know that the senator probably will talk about this some, but when the Senate flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2019, that's when we started to see the really bad stuff just going through the body, just completely unchecked. As assistant floor leader, I'm up fighting and debating and making sure that the legislative history is clear about what our priorities are, what our interests are. But we know that when a bill comes to the floor, they've got the votes and it's going to pass. So it's hard to be a happy warrior, when you know that that's what the situation is. It can kind of wear on you after a while. But I think that the fight is still there to make sure that we are heard and that your values are being heard on the floor. A couple of things that I see, and then maybe we can go back and forth so I'm not monopolizing this. But a couple of things that I see coming up potentially this year. One is the assisted suicide bill, what they are calling medical aid in dying. Amy Poland is the assembly member and on assembly side that carries this bill. This bill has been kicking around for a long time. The last time it got through committee was in 2016, I believe, which was prior to me coming to the assembly. She has now been named with Dick Gottfried having finally retired after some 50 years in service. She is now the head of the health committee in the assembly side. And it's my understanding, although it's really rumor at this point, but it's my understanding that she believes she has the votes to advance it through committee and to get it to the floor for a vote. So pay very close attention to that bill this session. It has been amended. They believe she will argue that some of the advocates for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are starting to withdraw their objections to the bill. My understanding is that I believe it's Multiple Sclerosis Society. They had previously objected to the bill. I think they've removed their objections. So we're going to get more greatly briefed on this bill as it comes forward. But I think that that's a real risk. The advocates for that bill are in the LOB and in the Capitol almost every day, and they're really, really fighting for it. So that's something to definitely watch. One issue that I think has come up this year that Governor Hochul has been talking about is a big housing initiative that she's trying to push through. And in pushing those targets through in terms of number of homes and number of units throughout the state, she put forward a very troubling proposal to basically override local zoning in order to accomplish these mandates and goals. I think that's something we really have to keep an eye on. As somebody who came up through local government, I served on my town board, my zoning board, and my planning board before then working at the county level and now at the state level. I understand that these local boards are extremely important because they are kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as what individual communities want to see in their communities in terms of housing and housing opportunities. And so I'm very troubled by that. It's going to be very interesting as we go through budget hearings and then finally start to see budget language, whether that's going to be part of it. The CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is the Climate Act, That's going to be something to really watch this year. How much will it be funded? We know about the whole gas stove controversy that we've been seeing on the news. The blueprint that was released by the Climate Council says one thing, and then the governor is starting to already walk back some of these proposals and saying, no, we're not going to take away gas stoves, only for new construction, only for, commercial or residential construction. I don't really know what she means at this point. I don't know what that language is going to end up looking like, but it's something we all have to keep an eye on, because this blueprint, which was largely developed during the pandemic, during a time, they had a lot of stakeholder meetings, they've had a lot of meetings, we've been briefed, but that blueprint, when it was rolled out at the beginning of January, has a lot to say about how we're going to heat our homes, how we're going to cook, what we're going to be able to do as individuals in this state. So we really do need to keep a very close eye on that. And then I'll turn it over to Senator. One thing I'm keeping a close eye on, and I'm on the Education Committee. That's one of the committees that I sit on. And the Climate Act talked a lot about, and the governor is now talking about, the whole issue of electrification of buses and the electrification of school buses. Did you know that by 2035, all school buses in New York State will have to be electric or zero-emission buses? It's got the schools very concerned. Of course, the pupil transportation department's very concerned. These buses are 3 times as expensive. We don't have enough to meet the demand. They're heavier, so they're going to tax our roads and bridges more and requiring more in the way of investments there. And they have a range of about 100 miles when you don't have the heat on in the buses. But we know we live in the Northeast. If the heat's on in the buses to keep the kids warm, it drains the batteries out, and it's just a big mess. So again, while we all could support the idea of maybe gradually becoming greener, I think that some of these mandates that are coming top down from the state down are going to cause some real problems, both from a financial point of view and also from other points of view as well. So let me send it over to you so I don't take it all.
No, you did that was a great overview.
More,
Thank
but
you.
yeah, that's just some of the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you. So when Jason reached out, and Mary Beth, thank you. Thank you for the great fight. You do an amazing job on the floor. You learned from one of my mentors, Andy Goodell. But when Jason asked me to sit on this panel, he said, I want you to give an overview of what you think we're going to see in Albany. And I don't want to get too technical, but I think we're going to see more batshit crazy stuff from these guys, because that's what they do. Just what she described is just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm a business owner. Jason mentioned that. We have more and more declared socialists in the legislature. We have people that, and it's worse than that. It's folks that have never in their life had a callus on their hand or a tough day in their life, but they're socialists. They believe that this is going to work. So they went from being an advocate, which I'm not sure how you make a living being an advocate, to being a staffer for a senator or assembly member, to being a senator or assembly member. Those are the people that are saying that, you know what, we're going to just cut natural gas off. That's a great idea for New York State. All these other ridiculous proposals, we're going to see more and more of that. The CLCPA and the Climate Action Council scoping plan is probably the most troubling, because I'm from Western New York. New York State in general has a big reserves of natural gas. And we are basically going to shut that off. And instead, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to electrify everything. But what does that really mean? They're pretending that we're going to power everything with wind turbines and solar panels. That's not the truth. When they shut down the Tonawanda plant, the NRG plant, and the Dunkirk plant in my district, what did they do? They stopped conversion to natural gas from coal, and instead they ran transmission lines. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars to run transmission lines to the dirtiest coal plants in America, like Homer City, Pennsylvania. That's what's powering New York State. So this is just a shell game. It's nothing but virtue signaling, because in the end, we did this hearing, quote unquote, for the Climate Action Council scoping plan, and one of the lead people on the committee was a professor from Cornell. Imagine how based in reality he is. My first question was, we're talking about spending probably $1 trillion. We're going to convert everything to electricity, and the goal is we're going to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions for New York State. And I said, can you tell me, this is my first question, can you tell me what percentage of global greenhouse gas emissions New York State is responsible for? What was his answer? I don't know. 2.5 years, that didn't come up? Like, this is the goal? We're trying to set a goal. We're trying to destroy New York's economy, turn us into a socialist state, a third world nation, really, that's not going to be able to know if when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be able to turn the power on, and is it going to be there? So all this to fight climate change. And what exactly is the goal, and what are we going to achieve if New York completely eliminates greenhouse gas emissions? He didn't know the answer. That tells you, he said, well, this is, we're going to be a leader in New York State. We're going to lead the nation. I said, yes, very much like the first lemming off the cliff leads the rest of them. That's what we're going to do in New York State. So there's no reality. There's been no cost-benefit analysis. There's been really no attention to the people that actually are supposed to do this. If you could think of one group of people that would think electrifying everything in New York State would be great for them, who would that be? How about the IBEW, the electricians that would get all that work? They're opposed to this idea because they know it's not going to work. They said this is a bad idea, but we're not going to listen to them. Yet to find an engineer that can sign off on this, that actually is worthy of their engineering degree. So no cost-benefit analysis, no reality as to what exactly this is going to mean. Certainly, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have our grid is already failing us. And truly, folks, this is not about climate change. This is not about being green. This is truly, and this is nationwide, this is about taking the United States down. That's what this is about. Okay, let's not make no mistake about it, okay? That's why they're attacking agriculture, and that's why they're attacking energy. We can't feed ourselves. We can't power ourselves. We can't be a world superpower anymore, okay? And all these folks that think we're going to save the planet by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they're just the useful idiots, to borrow a term from the Cold War, the useful idiots for this agenda to bring down the United States. Don't let them do that. That's why we do the fight. That's why we're here every day. And what we do on the floor is important. The debates that we do are important because it gets them on record that they don't know enough. Have you ever watched a debate when you see Republicans versus Democrats? When there's a Republican, and in the Senate, the rules are a little different. We have to stop and ask permission for each question from the President of the Senate. That's to give them time, because they don't really know these bills. It gives them time to get answers. So if you ever watch, when we debate a bill, it's usually me by myself or any of the other Republicans. And then you flash to them, and they've got like an army of people surrounding them to answer questions, because they don't know anything about the bill. They just put their name on it. And they literally, that's why in the Senate, that's why you have to say, Mr. President, will the sponsor yield for a question? And the President, will the sponsor yield? And then he has to answer, yes, the sponsor will yield. Well, I mean, they do all this to kill time so that they can get answers to the questions because they don't know the legislation at all. They have their name on it. And you saw this with bail reform. You're seeing this with all the climate stuff. You're seeing all the other things that they claim are so great for New Yorkers. All these bills they just have their name on them, because they're written by the most radical elements of every interest group. The tail is wagging the dog in the Democratic Party. They don't sit down with the stakeholders and have a meeting with a cross-section of stakeholders where we get input and then we craft responsible legislation. That's not how this works. They take the loudest, most radical people in any subject, and those are the people that get to write the legislation, and that's what ends up on the floor, and that's what passes. And that's why New York is really spiraling out of control. They truly want to make us into a third world nation here, where we're not sure from day to day if you're going to be able to feed your kids, if you're going to be able to get to work, if you're going to be able to turn on the lights. That's what it's like to be in a third world country, and that's where New York is headed. Now, on that happy note, we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, we're all sad now.
All right, first question. To give the public a better understanding of what it means to be conservative, why not pass an alternate budget in the Senate and the Assembly passed exclusively by Republicans, which contains tax cuts and spending cuts and regulation cuts over 1 to 3 years, and then go out and sell it to the people?
That's a very good question. So we actually do something like that. We have the Rescue New York plan. We've done it every year. The Rescue New York plan actually outlines all the bills that we have that would do that would extend tax cuts, that would reduce regulation, that would roll back the CPPAC. So we do that. And I will tell you, since you're asking that question, that means you're not hearing it. So we certainly need to engage better, and we certainly need to get the message out there better. But that is an alternative plan. Passing an entire budget plan will be a little more challenging, only because there's obviously it's hundreds of people over the course of months. But to put together at the high level what our goals are, that's what our Rescue New York plan is, and we're going to continue to push that message out there.
Yeah, so as the budget comes out, we usually see 9 or so bills, 10 bills, and as each budget bill comes to the floor, it will be debated. So interesting about the stalling that you mentioned, I just have to mention this. In the Assembly chamber, we had our debate time cut in half. So each member of the Assembly used to be able to debate any bill for 15 minutes and then could get a second 15 if we wanted to. They took that away. Each member can now debate up to 15, and then the one person, usually it would be Mr. Goodell as our floor leader, could get a second 15. But they're trying to cut the debate on these bad bills because they don't want to hear it. And honestly, as I told you before, the seats will be empty now, so because they don't want to hear it. They don't even want to hear the debate. They don't want to be bothered with it. They've been in their conference, in their own little echo chamber, and they heard what they think this bill might be about, and they don't want to be confronted with the fact that, to the point, the answer to the question that you asked the professor from Cornell is, New York represents 0.04% of global emissions, 0.04%, and yet we're going to completely kill our economy in order to pat ourselves on the back and say what great leaders we are in climate. But anyway, thanks, Jason.
Where are we with the wrongful death bill? If it passes, how much insurance does the typical driver need, and at what cost?
Well, the governor's vetoed it, so we don't know what's going to happen at this point. I mean, I don't know if they'll push it forward again. I haven't heard anything about that.
Well, and I think, look, we had some Republicans support it. It was a mixed bag. It was, but ultimately, anything that increases costs in New York State, it expands the definition of what a family member is. I mean, right now, I think there's just like anything else that they pass, there is probably a compromise that will be reasonable enough that it could be supported, but they don't really care. They have the votes on their side, and this is another bill that is a benefit to certain groups of people at the detriment to the rest of us, and that's really the troubling part about it. So I was glad to see the governor veto it. Certainly, I'm hoping that she gets more of a backbone. I mean, let's face it, she signed this historic pay increase and to get anything for it. Andrew Cuomo, as much as he was a detestable human being, would have had a laundry list, a Christmas list, if you will, of things that he wanted in exchange for him to sign that bill. Hector LaSalle, she got nothing for that. She's getting pushed around. They stacked the Judiciary Committee, and so far she's done nothing. So, I mean, when the bully asks for your lunch money the first time, that's not the last time. And unfortunately, she hasn't learned that lesson.
I'd ask you to please set your cell phones to silent or vibrate as we go throughout the day today. Next question. Where are we with vaccine mandates for children in regard to the COVID vaccine mandate and even flu shots?
Well, there is legislation to do that. It's not gone anywhere. I think that, look, the governor takes polls just like everybody else, and I don't think that, especially now, they've seen so many negative impacts of the vaccine and really no benefits. I mean, I don't know, I don't see how they could justify that. And not only is it, a fraction of children that would actually have any kind of adverse effects from COVID, the list of bad reactions is much larger. So I'm hoping that there's been some common sense a little bit on their side of the aisle, because they have to double down on this. They're the ones who supported this. They're the ones that pushed this. You walk around the Capitol, and it's really kind of dystopian because you see the staffers are all required to wear masks, but not the members. No. Just I mean, think about that. They're creating this system where these people have to walk around with masks on, but not for the privileged few, not for the political elite. That's this is how they've really become. They've gone so far off the rails. I mean, look, I come from a family of Democrats. My father, my grandfather. This is not the Democratic Party of my father and my grandfather. They have truly become this totalitarian, socialist agenda that they. That was usually just a few crazy people in colleges like Cornell that would talk about.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. I've seen that change just in the time that I've been in the Assembly. you used to have more moderate Democrats that you could work with across the aisle on things. That number is really starting to dwindle. And I think, as the senator said, what we're getting more are members who have come up through community activism. Some of them are younger lawyers. The average age has dropped, considerably, especially from the downstate members. They're in their 20s. They're hunger striking during budget. They're the first ones out with the bullhorn at the rallies. That's what they know. It's not kind of that deliberative, thoughtful kind of debate. It's much more just kind of bomb-throwing, headline-grabbing kind of. That's the sense, and it doesn't really benefit the institution as a whole. I don't think it doesn't. I think it really drags it down.
Well, and their leadership allows it to happen, though. That's the bottom line. The leadership has, allowed these socialists, these activists, to do exactly those things. They don't have the willingness to rein them in, and that's why so many of these bad bills end up. Used to be that those bad bills got stuck in committee or never went anywhere. A416 was a great example of that. It was an orphan for all those years until the governor decided to put it into health regulation. And by the way, Bobby Ann Cox is here, the attorney that helped us win that case. So we defeated the isolation and quarantine. But those are the kind of bills that typically never go anywhere.
Right.
And now they're getting into a committee and they're getting onto the floor.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the so-called good cause eviction bill?
If not paying your rent isn't a good cause, then what is?
It's really amazing that the governor is rolling out this huge need to create all these additional housing units. Well, first of all, we lead the nation in out-migration, so you'd think that there'd be plenty of housing stock around. And then the second thing is, after we've kicked landlords in the teeth so hard over the last few years with all of these different bills, and then we're all scratching our heads and saying, gee, I wonder why the landlord doesn't want to be a part of this whole process anymore. We're going to have to either make them create, the housing stock, or what. But it's so interesting that there is a ripple effect from every bill that's passed, and year after year you come back and they say, oh well, wait a minute, now we need more affordable housing units. Well, you would have had them if you treated the landlords fairly. I mean, to a much greater extent than we've got.
Well, and I think there's a greater thing here. The whole cancel rent idea was around long before the pandemic. But this moratorium on paying your rent, which literally anybody could stop paying their rent. They didn't have to have any kind of income verification, nothing. You self-attestation. That's a big thing with us. Self-attestation, which means I'm just going to lie to you, and you're not going to check and see if I'm lying. That's what self-attestation is But I think there's a bigger goal here. The goal is, because you hear them talk about how housing is a human right, and they would like us to once again live like a third world nation where the political elite gets private housing, the wealthy, the oligarchs, they have private housing, and they want the rest of us to live in some kind of government-controlled housing. That's the goal. The goal is either you can afford to own and maintain your own home, or you're going to live in something the government controls. And how do you do that? Well, you force people out of the private landlord business. Private property owners who don't live in their own property, that rented to someone else, are the enemy. And they tried to take as big a bite as they could out of all of those folks during the pandemic under the excuse of, we can't kick these people out. Even when we extended it long after anyone else. We extended it again in September of 21, and the rhetoric was disgusting. Now, in New York State, to evict someone is a months, if not years-long process. They were literally on the floor in September saying, if we don't do this tonight, tomorrow people are going to be on the street. They'll be kicked out of their homes. We've got to pass this. You can, in a mortgage, you can live in your home for 8 years and not pay your mortgage. To sit there and say that if we don't pass this bill tonight, people will be homeless tomorrow was just so ridiculous and so irresponsible.
And if I can pile onto that, you can take that same idea of cancel rent and apply it to cancel utility bills.
Yeah.
So we had individuals who didn't have to pay their utility bills throughout the pandemic, who just let it build and let it build. And of course, they were getting money from the state, and they should have been making responsible, even partial payments on their bills. That's what we do in our houses when we when we're falling behind, you call and you make a plan and you try to catch up and you make progress payments, and that's what normal, reasonable people do. But no, so they basically had just didn't pay for a long time, and now those are largely being canceled as well. Last year there were hundreds of millions of dollars that were allocated to cancel out utility bills, and now again this year there's been hundreds of millions of dollars that have been allocated to doing the same thing. So at what point is there personal responsibility? That's really an overriding theme.
Absolutely.
Assemblywoman, when will the redistricting be complete?
Okay, so I'm hoping we're going to know something by April or so maybe June. They're starting to do some public hearings around. It's awful. I will just say that on our side of the aisle, what the lines that I ran on last year weren't that different from the lines I ran on in 2016 when I first ran. Now these draft lines that are out are, in some cases, very, very different. So I hope we have some finality soon. I love getting, so interesting, so I represent, a large portion of my district right now is Saratoga County, and I was in the kind of unique situation where Saratoga County, the population grew. It grew so much that when they redistricted and did the lines for me, they had to take population out of my district to make it around the same 130,000 people that everybody in all the districts represent. So I knew I was going to probably lose some area, but the way the draft lines are right now, I'm not super happy about. So hopefully we'll know soon. I really hope so. The Senate's all set. You're good for now. Luckily, you're good.
Well, and speaking of the Senate, I know Senator Borrello's on a hard stop here in just a few moments, so I'm going to throw a Senate question to him. Where does Hector LaSalle's nomination stand? Will there be a floor vote on that chief judge?
So that's a good question. So at this point, it really is, first of all, I think that he deserves a vote on the floor because that's what the Constitution says. The Constitution says the Senate shall consider, which is that's not the Judiciary Committee, that's not certain members of the Senate, that's not just Democrats, that's the full Senate. So he deserves his day on the floor. My hope is that, once again, the governor will grow a spine, and she should bring a lawsuit. I think that's clear. My guess is she's once again negotiating perhaps to switch him out with someone else because she's not up for the fight. But the bottom line is, stay tuned. We'll see what kind of action can be taken to make sure that the Constitution is followed.
All right, and then last question, and this may take a little explanation. So can you talk about the right to repair bill and how the governor's version of it can hurt the consumer and give corporations control over the products we buy, making private ownership of products disappear? Thoughts on that one? There's a lot in that one, so.
Well, I do recall that we had a chapter amendment to that bill come up, I think, last week, was it, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah, which carved out, softened the impact of the right to repair bill. The exact nuances of it, I can't say that I could really speak to very well right now, but the idea was certain industries really were concerned about their technology, right? And
the proprietary nature.
The proprietary nature, yeah.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate that answer just as much because don't snow us if you don't know. So
No,
I really do.
I'm real honest about what I know.
I appreciate the honesty there. Yeah. So, what is the status of modifying cashless bail?
No, go.
Wind him up and let him loose.
Yeah.
I know.
I think the governor recognizes what a disaster this is, but my understanding is they just can't get enough. They can't get enough consensus in the Democratic conference to make any meaningful changes. And they did this whole smoke and mirrors thing last year where they said they were making changes to cashless bail. In fact, I debated Senator Bailey on this at the end of session. And I said, Andrea Stewart-Cousins says that we're changing cashless bail, that we're going to, that we've made changes, but you've said we're not making changes. Which is it? And he said, well, we're making clarifications to cashless. I said, okay. I said, so This is important, Senator Bailey, because your leader's saying they're making changes. You say they're clarifications. Can you please, once again, are you making changes to cashless bail? His response was, a clarification is a change. Now, my response was, no, it's not. A clarification is just clarifying what you've already told us. It's not a change. So they really don't, and by the way, Senator Bailey is a very smart, capable person. So for him not to be able to give a substantive answer means that they truly having issues on their side. So to answer the question, I think there's certainly a push. I think that the governor needs to get involved and push more, and she needs to, I think, step up her game. We're going to continue to push. We're going to continue to point out the flaws and the dangers. I mean, New York State is far more dangerous, and they want to blame it on COVID. They actually some people actually blame it on climate change. Climate change is why crime is up. I mean, don't believe your lying eyes, folks. And then there's those that are saying that it's not up.
Well, and I'll share with you that last week there was a joint Senate and Assembly hearing that, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, I was allowed to sit in on, to talk about. I think the point of what they were trying to do with the hearing was to basically say, we're going to look at the data the way that we've pulled the data together, and the people that we've invited to come in and basically say, pay no attention to all the people getting pushed in front of subway trains and all of the crime that we're seeing. And that's just all the New York Post, that's just all political rhetoric. And this hearing was just Albany at its worst. It was, I almost didn't want to go. I almost wasn't even going to waste my time and go. And I thought, no, we need to have representation from both sides of the aisle at this, to hold this here, to just keep this, making the points that need to be made. So, for example, I'm an attorney that practices in family court. I still have a small practice where I represent children primarily. And so my questions really had to do with juvenile justice and raise the age, and what were the statistics that were out there that had to do with that. So I started to ask the representatives who were there from DCJS, and because they maintained some data. Oh, they didn't have any data about 16 and 17-year-old crime. And I said, oh, and they gave me some snarky answer like, well, we only gave you 22 pages of analysis. It would have been 55 pages if we did the 16 and 17-year-olds like that. And I said, well, wait a minute. The problem is that the Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS, they're not here. They're not providing any testimony today. So, and DOCS wasn't there to provide any data about incarcerated individuals and recidivism and the impact of the HALT Act and all of that other stuff. So it was very selective. The data was, we all know that data can say whatever you want it to say. They were looking at snapshots that were, if you blinked, you missed the time frame that they're measuring this reduction in violence. So it was a joke. It was just an absolute joke. But I agree with the senator. You're absolutely right. I think that it's going to be a lot of push and shove in the budget process. If we see changes to cashless bail, it's going to be a policy piece that's going to be shoved into the budget, because it's going to be the only way that they can get that done.
Yeah, and I think that just the final thing is, if they really were going to make meaningful change, they can't, because of all the advocates. They're going to hide something in the budget process, because that's what they do, and it's not going to be anything substantive. But I will say that this hearing blew up in their face, because NYPD was there with their data. Nobody collects data better than NYPD. They report it monthly, and the numbers are outrageous. You had representatives from the DA's Association there. So again, they say, don't believe your lying eyes, folks. Look at the data that they manipulate. And even then, they couldn't hold it together. So they've got a real problem. And when you've basically upset every other group of people in the entire state except for criminals, you've got a problem. And I think that's where the Democrats are. They're like the last constituency being served by the Democratic Party are criminals. And by the way, they're not incarcerated individuals, they're prisoners. I'm not calling them incarcerated individuals. Far too many syllables. So.
All right, and on that note, man of my word, we said we'd get you out here by that time. You both have events to be at. Would you please show your appreciation to Senator George Borrello and Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh?